We're going live now. Should be fine. Okay, I think we are live now for the episode 9 of FPL Script for season 3. This is the 24-25 FPL season. We're at Gameweek 5 now, but we'll quickly just recap Gameweek 4. I'm FPL Fran, your co-host, with Mike, usual co-host, Schadenfreude with a 1. On X, we had relatively average game weeks, I would say, but I guess against the field of some of our elite competitors who had much worse game weeks, it actually feels pretty good. And I think we know that we're sort of in good stead, I would say. I had 53 points. Henderson, Dunk, Trent, Lewis, Konsa. Lewis playing only 45 minutes, which was a bit of a dampener for me. And then Bruno, Saka, Eze, Rogers, Isak. Terrible. Generally across the board, other than Saka and Bruno doing some work, I suppose. And then Haaland doing the entire heavy lifting for my and your team, presumably. But yeah, how was your game week?
Yeah, I think there's nothing else to say. It's entirely ordinary, but can't complain because there's so many people who did not own Haaland. So I suppose it was slightly better. But I've seen that a lot of people who did not own Haaland also got a Gabriel auto sub. So my sympathy for them only extends so much.
True.
Yeah. So
also, I have to complain. Anyone who got a Gabriel auto sub from getting João Pedro and Adam Armstrong through towards Gabriel, that's tilting. So tilting for me.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. So the only players we had different was I got in Salah because I had a lot of free transfers, but of course he chose not to do anything rather. He did nothing in FPL and in UCL Fantasy, so great start for my fantasy teams with respect to Salah. But other than that, nothing else to talk about. Muniz is just a dead option. I need to get rid of him, but there's no urgency, I suppose. I'll look at it on the wildcard when I wildcard in 8 or 6. Other than that, hopefully Ben Brereton Diaz starts next week because I need him against Ipswich because that could actually be a good source of expected value.
Yeah, I think definitely the case. I mean, with the sort of Archer pen miss, that was sort of good news, but also crazy that Ben didn't take the penalty anyways because...
Oh, sorry. Speaking of tilting, that was actually tilting because I went through this entire chain of events where I had benched Ben Brereton Diaz. They got a penalty. I was happy he didn't take it. And then I found out João Pedro was missing. And then I was unhappy that he didn't take it. But then again, as a United fan, I'm okay. We at least we won. So maybe, I don't know. It's a roller coaster of emotions.
Fair enough. So I think what I wanted to jump onto this week was just discussing my plans for FPL. I mean, we saw my team previously. I think I'm actually very happy with my team, but then I ran, this is just on default minutes, by the way, on Review, just the chip strategy tool. So once again, shout out to FPL Review for creating this amazing tool that he did last season. And it's now very easy to sort of use within just your regular transfer interface. So have a look at Review as usual. But this is, my team specific. This doesn't mean that Wildcard 6 is objectively good. It's just subjectively good for my team on the default minutes. But as you can see, there's quite a bit of separation between Wildcard 6 and not wildcarding. Now, clearly, we don't understand, I guess, the full, scope of the run of games after, let's say, the 12 game week on my horizon. But it's generally showing that Wildcard 6 is very competitive for me. And that makes sense because obviously I planned for it all along. So it's kind of nice that it's showing up strong. And with the amount of doubts that I have in my team, it feels good to dead end this game week because I think there are doubts, by way of, let's say, João Pedro and Isak, and it feels good to maybe call it quits with my team, but also just to get that sort of immediate EV bag, really, where as a Haaland owner, ultimately, I don't really have a great captain for this game week. We'll talk about captaincy later on in that captaincy segment, but generally speaking, of course, here in Wildcard 6, I can clearly go towards someone like Salah with 2 free transfers having rolled last week, and I can get some sort of value there by either maybe pawning off an Eze or a Bruno or an Isak, right? So that's sort of what my thoughts are, and I think I'm leaning towards committing to it as well, simply because, okay, Wildcard 6 isn't necessarily on an international break, but I should hopefully have 2 free transfers by, let's say game week 8, and I think I'd be a little bit more well equipped to deal with any issues that come up then. And then on top of that, generally speaking, I think a lot of people are also sort of on this line of thinking anyways, and I'm hoping to get some sort of price movement, within my direction in a positive way for my team. That's pretty much what my thoughts are on Wildcard 6.
I also think that, I know it's technically not dead ending any longer, but I get what you mean, especially because if you can transfer out, for example, Isaac and Saka, or Isaac and Bruno, I don't know how you are planning things out, but essentially you can maybe skip 2 price drops and get in on at least a price rise. And if Salah plays well against Bournemouth, potentially even 2 price rises for Salah, because I saw that he's close to a price rise. I don't know if he's going to rise today or tomorrow, because the window is closing in fast for him to rise in price. But even if he doesn't, I think now it's as good a time as any, right? Because all the games are done. There's nothing else left from an injury perspective, unless, I mean, the stuff with Alisson last season comes to mind. But let's say that doesn't happen very often. So looks good actually. And with this chip timing tool from Review, it really helps us contextualize wildcards that are close together. Like you said, it doesn't make a lot of sense to compare, let's say, wildcard 14, because it's so far out that you don't get the full extent of future EV. But even with wildcard 14, it's not the same thing this season, right? Because there is no Club World Cup now. In December, it's moved to next year, when there's a mid-season break. So from that perspective as well, and to be honest, no one from Premier League was going to play anyway. But even if they were, I was just thinking from that point of view. So looks good actually. I was just going to ask you about the robustness. So how many free transfers are you banking in and around the wildcard? Because maybe that's going to prove to be a useful thing later on.
Yeah, so that's the issue. Like, my best game week 6 moves do require 2 free transfers anyways. And I think another point to add is, if I was, let's say, going wildcard agnostic, I would still be using those 2 free transfers, and that would be getting Haaland out of my team as well. Because what I find is that if I go non-wildcard, or I delay the wildcard, my best move is to go out of Haaland and then to actually bring someone else in. And obviously Watkins and Solanke are very interesting, but that's potentially like a loss of, let's say, maybe around like 0.3 really in terms of team value, because Haaland is projected to also rise in price very shortly. If he's 15.3, it'll still take me 0.2 to get back to him in the future. Even though I would have technically pocketed 0.1. And obviously I'm in a situation now where, I own him basically at 15.1. So it does feel odd, I think, looking at the moves there and then comparing to if I don't sell Haaland and I sort of swerve wildcard 6, then the next competitive move, I suppose, is something like maybe Saka to Son, maybe Isak to Solanke, something like that. But that's a lot of EV short of the moves that sell Haaland. So either way, I think I'm sort of net losing in those circumstances. And I'd rather wildcard 6 instead, is sort of my thinking right now. And I do find that if I, let's say, force include Haaland on a wildcard 6 solve, I don't lose much EV really for going for Haaland and keeping him. And that's not even really taking into account, as I said, some of these price impacts, especially with the future rise, right? So yeah, that's sort of my thoughts too about why I don't really like the path on, let's say, a wildcard 7, 8 or agnostic, because of what it takes in terms of selling Haaland for my team, and me feeling like my team isn't necessarily to be benefiting from that per se. But yeah.
So before we move on, I also wanted to talk about other wildcard windows. So for example, wildcard 7 actually shows up pretty high on the chip timing tool for a lot of managers that I've spoken to. My only concern with wildcard 7 is, given what has happened in the previous international break, I absolutely do not want to bet against injuries happening again. And it's going to be really difficult to swerve players who are not playing in the international break, because it's effectively all good players. So if you have good players in your team, they are going to go away on international duty. So I really don't want to do that. So even though my team in 7 is looking really bad right now, because of a few matchups, I still want to try and wildcard in 8. Now from wildcard 3, I've seen, or rather wildcard 4, I've seen that the price rises are going to be minimal, right? That's, I think, pretty much guaranteed now, given what has happened in the previous international break. Or maybe not guaranteed, but
Yeah.
looks like it's trending towards that direction. Maybe things will be different in the second international break, but from what I've seen now, it doesn't seem to be that should be a reason to wildcard. So some things to consider from that perspective. If you're just concerned about fixture turning over and EV, wildcard 7 does seem to be a really good option because it lets you skip a couple of fixtures and get back Holland. Like you said, I think that is the most critical point, that you have to sell Holland now and then get him back on wildcard 7, which means you skip Arsenal, Newcastle, and Fulham, if I'm remembering correctly. So it's going to take someone with good enough risk appetite to go for it, I think, based on what happened. The other thing was, you mentioned about all the paths that you looked into, right? For example, wildcard 4 and looking into what transfers are suggested by review, so on and so forth. Not wildcard 4, wildcard 5, for example. I did something where for wildcard or other transfers in Gameweek 3, where I used wildcard in every single slot that I thought was feasible, and I looked at what sensitivity analysis gave me, and I converted that into sort of a frequency table for moves. And so it gave me the opportunity to weigh different options given different chip strategies. It's just something I tried out because I thought maybe it will help me make a more robust decision. And based on that, the most robust decision was to do Muniz to Joao Pedro. I did the other move where I bought Salah in, which was slightly lower in frequency. So it's just something that I would suggest people to do. I've yet to check if this is mathematically valid, as in, does collecting the table in this way make sense? Because it's all fine combining numbers and creating data, but also it has to make some sort of sense. So maybe I'll think about it more. But from face value, I think it's a pretty easy way to evaluate your moves.
That's pretty interesting, actually. I guess always I would tend to think about it like it feels like that or let's say moves that you find with high frequency would probably be robust in that moment, but then it doesn't necessarily mean you'd feel the same way, or that, you know, looking back, the move that you let's say went for yourself like didn't end up being more robust. Because I feel like, yeah, with the EV swings that happened like this early in the season, and then also just generally speaking, like how crazy impacts are, like Joao Pedro being injured, you just never really know like how bad things can turn out. And then there's also the structural piece sometimes where when you're, let's say, invested in a specific type of team and you're looking for like transfers out, like I'm thinking about, let's say, Luke's situation where he owns KDB. That's a very unique asset at a very unique price point. So suddenly if that player gets injured, you know, how does one really deal with that is always what I find interesting. So what I like doing myself is sort of thinking about available substitutes as well in that position, which is why I spend a lot of time looking at a lot of xMins for players. And that's sort of how I think about, okay, in a few game weeks time, if I have issues crop up, does it feel like my team can navigate quite easily or not? Is how I like to play around. And I think I'd take a bit more of like, let's say, an emotional approach of just looking at my team and just saying, okay, am I happy with it? Am I okay with, let's say, if Joao Pedro's crocked, do I have other options? And I think that's also why I probably started the season with only like one 5.5 forward, I would say, because I wasn't that confident in 100%, let's say, having Joao Pedro and Armstrong being available in Game Week 4, because I feel like a lot of managers started the season with both potentially, and I think that's totally fine, because obviously if you went Salah only, you wouldn't have Haaland. You probably would have gone for two 5.5s, and now of course we have like Vardy and DCL as depth. But I remember looking at, let's say, my almost penciled in move in Game Week 4 was exactly what a lot of people did want to do, right? Which was like Saka to Salah last week, Isak to a 5.5 like João Pedro, while still retaining someone like Armstrong. But then you can kind of see like how that was so reliant on Armstrong and JP both being alive at that 5.5 price point. Now we kind of have to search a little bit higher for options, or of course we've missed the boat on a Vardy per se, but yeah, like that's what I tend to look at as well. And I feel like one of the issues that we're having within FPL, and I think it's good to sort of shift towards the xMins corner anyways, is that I think we have a really strong lack of depth within the midfield position for the first time ever. Like I generally don't think there are many good midfield picks, which is why when I think about like wildcard 6 and I think we've already entered into discussions thinking about it, the likes of Bruno, the likes of Bowen are coming up strong, because you just want to find someone who actually can just deliver something.
Yep.
Anything.
Continue to play.
Exactly. Yep. And we have like none of the 5.x options are really that appealing. I feel like Minte's waned for a lot of managers. His minutes haven't been good. Smith Rowe fixtures are getting worse. Shade's the one interesting pick, and we'll talk about him and Carvalho in a moment. But yeah, like you've lost. Eze's lost penalties prospectively, and he probably
has, right? I mean,
I think he has. Yeah, I mean, I think we're fully agreed on that. But yeah, for the most part, there's not much depth at all in the midfield. And then actually, when I look at the forwards too, it's like there's, I guess, one forward per price point. If you're shopping outside of the 5.x's, like you have to literally jump from Solanke to another tier to get to Havertz, and then another tier to get to Isak, or another tier to get to Watkins. And it does feel like you can't chop and change that easily compared to prior seasons. And part of that is because pricing is stronger. Like I think Rogue actually posted his analysis in terms of pricing. We saw that sort of U-turn back into competitive pricing. But yeah, I think it's interesting that I guess some of the budget options aren't there from some of the weaker teams as well. Like for example, when we discuss a team like Southampton, I feel like you and I both own Bern Diaz in different fantasy games, but we're equally upset with like the outcomes of him, and I don't think we look very fondly about owning him right now, and it's kind of funny from that perspective.
That's actually a great point. So sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to mention here that even though BBD is the only one out of those, for example, Mavididi, Smithrow, all of them, where he has gotten decent minutes except for Gameweek 4.
Yeah,
it still feels like it's not enough, because there's actually nothing to look forward to in terms of the team strength. Even if the minutes are there, the team strength is completely lacking, which is crazy, because I just think you're right that the pricing is much better than a lot of the seasons that have gone by recently. But I also feel like they've lucked into this situation where every single cheap midfielder has absolutely died out. Like even if one of Nkunku, Mavididi, or Smithrow already has scored and assisted, but I mean Smithrow with like 80 plus minutes every single week, were there, then I think everyone would have gravitated towards that pick, and that pick would have shot up in price. Like for example, McAllister, right? 2 seasons ago, when it was his last season for Brighton, I remember that he scored some ridiculous goals early on in the season. He got some penalties, and his price rose by like 0.3, 0.4 million early on in the season. So we've really seen a lack of that price point. And now that you've said it, it's actually dawned on me that this is why it's really easy and difficult at the same time. Really easy because there aren't many choices to make, but really difficult because you have to stack up transfers in order to make these moves. You can't just use one free transfer to make that move, because those moves aren't robust enough, like you said.
Yeah, and that's, I think that's been the slight pity, I suppose, of the season, because we're already running thin, and I know people are talking about excluding certain players, but yeah, like it's not great. Either way though, I think what's nice is we still see like a lot of variety in team structures, and part of that might just be like the different plans that everyone has had. Like I've seen Salah only teams now reconsidering a wild card just because of some of the events happening. I know wildcard 3 hasn't had a great run so far, but it's like there's nothing to say that they won't maybe win out in future game weeks where Palmer could be an edge, things like that. So I do find that yeah, the season's fun, but it's definitely been a super slow start for most of analytics. And I think we can see that too with Lucas's kind of graphic showing the median ranks of a lot of people within analytics right now, and it's much worse than last season, where I think we did think it was really bad already. So that's something I find quite funny. But in terms of xMins, I think we did talk about Shade and Carvalho. Any thoughts on them just to start off with?
So just for anyone who does not know yet, Visa has been ruled out for a couple of months by Thomas Frank. So the Brentford are really looking at, again, a 5-3-2 structure when they play good teams, and 4-3-3 when they play decent teams, like around their team strength. So in both systems, I think Shada is probably going to play either second striker or one of the wing positions, or even the central striker position, right, when they play 4-3-3. So I just feel like Shada's minutes are much better than someone like Carvalho. My only concern with Carvalho is he started in the EFL Cup and he got a couple of returns, and so did Shada, I believe, but I might be wrong on that. I know for a fact that Carvalho got a couple of returns, so maybe people are eyeing him up.
Did get a couple of returns.
Yeah, bicycle kick. I saw the bicycle kick he scored. So if that's the case, if EFL Cup is going to be a benchmark for a team like Brentford, where they clearly don't play their first team attackers, as we've seen from Mbumo being benched in both EFL Cup games, I just feel like maybe he should be avoided, Carvalho that is, and I feel like Shada is a much better bet moving forward. Just because he started game week 1, right? Or am I wrong on that front? I believe game week 1.
Shada, yeah, I think he did.
Shada, yeah. Shada started game week 1. So I think his minutes are going to be much more robust, given that he was already in and around the team even at the start of the season when Visa was there. So I would definitely look into Shada. On Wildcard 6, I think that is an incredible break, right? Because, okay, fine. It's not that incredible because you have to have two Brentford midfielders. It's not like Shada is a forward in the game. So I suppose it's not that great, but have you thought about doubling up on Brentford midfield?
Yeah, 100%. I think.
Yeah.
I guess it depends on what your thoughts are on like Eze as well. And once again, we go back to some discussions about adjusting pen share, things like that. But Crystal Palace actually just generally have a strong run of games, but it's not like any of the sort of amazing home fixtures that we've seen. Like he's going to play Man United at home, which is a great game. His next best game is probably game week 9, where I think he plays Tottenham at home. And we've already passed, like, let's say Leicester at home. So yeah, the run of games is strong, but it's not like amazing. And so if you take away that value from Eze, then that sort of spot within, let's say, a wildcard 6, I think definitely is opened up towards someone like Shade, which I'm playing around with because that is a cost saving of like 1.2, and that's very often the difference between a lot of things. I'm also looking into, unfortunately, there's just not much variety in terms of how you triple up on Arsenal. So it's either you go double defense plus Saka, or you double double attack plus, one defender. And those are kind of the main conundrums right now of wildcard 6. You might also want to be looking into some of the minutes of the Man City attackers as well that aren't Haaland potentially. And then continuing to monitor someone like Rico Lewis, for example, because ultimately I think Rico Lewis is someone who arguably is close to as nailed as maybe Guardiola on defense, I feel. And that's very interesting. If you can wildcard into 6 with, let's say, keeping someone like Lewis in the team, that's some sort of value that I think a lot of people would miss out on. Other picks that I find quite interesting on a wildcard 6 are probably, how you want to mess around with.
On Lewis, I had a question about Lewis. So because you've owned him for a long time.
Yeah.
Just what would you say between him and Guardiola? I would stipulate that Guardiola is less likely to get subbed at halftime.
Yeah.
But he's more likely to miss out entirely
on starts. Yeah. Okay. That's what I mean.
Compared to someone like Rico Lewis. Again, this is based on very limited information. Obviously, that happened in the previous game week, which is why I'm stating this. But it does seem to be likelier, right? Because I think Guardiola is likely to start most of the Champions League games until they know that they are in the top 8. And even in the top 8, I don't know why you would stop, right? Because you want to have the easiest
Higher
matchup
seeding.
even in the
Yeah.
top 8. Higher seeding. You're absolutely right. So if that's the case, I don't see why Man City would now play their second string team in any of their games, because their easiest games are going to be between match days 2 and 4. From what I remember, they play pot 4, and pot 3 teams consecutively. So if that is going to be the case, I just feel like Guardiola is going to be that guy who's probably going to miss out on a game, but Ricolius probably plays or starts most games just because of the variability he possesses in terms of playing left back or right back.
That's true. I mean, obviously, like there's like Kovacic as well has been sort of sitting on the bench for a bit.
Rodri is fully back now.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that has some impacts with KDB being out. I guess that's really more Gundo and Foden that benefit. But I think what's interesting probably with Lewis is it doesn't seem like Walker and Stones are that close to the first team. So
I would agree with that.
Do they really have that much depth? I'm not so certain about it. And then Guardiola's also forced to play a lot of minutes of football going forward. So the 45-minute substitution wise, I don't think that would happen to Guardiola too often. Like I guess it's just how often is Rico Lewis going to be subbed off at 45 minutes versus how often is going to be Guardiola going to be rested, for example, like he has. And I'm not sure if there's like enough in it because of the price gap. But you'll find, for example, Guardiola's minutes are like amazing on, let's say, defaults. And then it's hard to sort of, I guess, stretch towards the idea of just buying into Guardiola when I could maybe, get away with Lewis, so to speak, is my thoughts, particularly since I'm also, having Lewis in my team already with a couple price rises banked in. So that's sort of where I'm at. And I think it is tricky to choose, like, to sort of just stretch up to Guardiola. But I'll probably get a bit more information after the Arsenal game because, yeah, I mean, if Lewis gets subbed off at 45 minutes versus Arsenal, I think that's probably going to make me a little bit cold on him because I still see him starting that game. But if he doesn't, if he plays another 90, then I guess I'd probably lean towards keeping him on a wildcard 6. And I think it's silly, but ultimately they have to navigate this run of games somehow. And I'll probably... I mean, we've all gone into City defenders in the past that aren't Ederson and understand that we kind of have to leave room for like some disappointment at times, but it's the opportunity cost, I think, is still there with Rico Lewis going forward. So I'm probably minded to keep him on my wild card right now.
On the balance of things, I think you are of the opinion that he starts versus Arsenal, right? Because I am very slightly on the side of he gets benched.
Okay.
Because of his minutes in Champions League, but I think you make a persuasive argument that might necessarily not be the case just because Walker and Stones have been so far off the pace. Given that Stones' error was what cost City the clean sheet in the previous game, I think maybe he could start as well. I just am on the side where maybe 51-49. I think
Diaz played really well in Champions League too, so it's like. As long as him and Akanji are sort of alive, I think that's the back three, really. Like, so
I'm also interested to see what lineup they put up against Watford, because if it is going to be completely second string, maybe John Stone starting could essentially classify him as that second string defender.
That's a good point too, because we will get that sort of information of those midweek EFL Cup games on the sort of like 24th to like 26th of September. So yeah, like prospectively on Wildcard 6, I'll have that information as well, which will make it, I guess, nice jumping into Game Week 6 plus. And we do know that, with some of the injuries that they have, like let's say KDB being out, that just means more Foden minutes inside, and that makes Savio better as well in terms of xMins. So Savio is definitely like one of the players that I think I'm very, very high on a wildcard 6, and I'll definitely be messing with his minutes. I know I wouldn't recommend everyone to do that, but you know I love my punts, so I'll probably be on someone like Savio. I imagine on the wildcard.
If you own Rico and Savio, then you clearly are in the camp where you don't care to target MD ranks. You just adjust your own minutes and play according to that, which I think is the name of the game, because
like I'm
xMins rank
definitely not.
doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, I'm definitely not playing for default ranks. So I think like I
Yeah,
already
exactly.
made that bed when I jumped onto Rico like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And every week he's got like 10 minutes basically, or I don't know, 30, 40, 50, which is like nothing for a defender, right? Because they're not even scratching 60. So yeah, I think I'm happy with where I'm at right now with sort of my thought process. I think City is definitely tough, and Pep, like adding shitty comments, like let's say, I don't know, like I like subbing players at 45 now, and that's
I'll
the
do
new
it
me.
again.
Like, oh my god, you're absolutely tilting me, but I'll jump into the fire for sure, if we can. And that's why, as I said, with the KDB injury, like if he gets assessed and he's out for a while, like that makes me super high on Savio, just by proxy of where Foden's minutes will sort of fall, because like the most often substitute that we've seen this season is something like, Foden in for Savio, but then actually what happened within the City game was that Bernardo basically played out wide in the UCL,
Right
which we've
wing.
seen obviously time and time before. He's just not really well suited to it. I think that kind of killed off their sort of attack on the right within that game, but at the same time, I think that's just what the game needed, because Inter were actually making some really strong subs. Like they were doing like Lautaro, Dumfries, couple subs that were definitely sort of team strengthening, I would say. And so City's ability to sort of hold the game off with like Bernardo right wing is like totally cool with me. So I'm not like super cold on Savio, for example, because of that. But that's that. And they'll have to manage their minutes too, because the season's ridiculous. In terms of Arsenal, actually, I'd like to jump into xMins corner, because obviously Havertz is someone that we find quite interesting, right? So like I discussed the sort of conundrum of how you operate around triple Arsenal on the wild card. I know I think, you know what, just give me your opinion on whether you're pro Havertz or pro double defense.
If you're wildcarding in 6, I think you should go double attack. Just because I believe even if Havertz plays number 8 and he plays 90 minutes or close to 90 minutes against both Leicester and Southampton, I believe the EV gain and just the potential is going to be there, regardless of where he plays. Because it's not as if he's staying back while everyone else is bombing forward and he's the only one who has to clean up, which is the case with a lot of teams, but not a team like Arsenal, because everyone is involved in the attack anyway. Even someone like Rice is, as we know, he's not like your classic number 6 anyway. He plays more like an 8. So if that's the case, I just don't see why you won't go for Havertz. Again, it depends on the robustness of the plan, right? If you think your free transfers are better off investing somewhere else or being invested somewhere else, sure, double defense makes sense, because you don't have to make any moves for the foreseeable future. Raya and a defender, if I'm getting that right. Because double defender seems too risky for me, but Raya and one defender absolutely is robust. But I just feel like on wildcard, if you don't want to take a risk where, because you can no longer dead end your team into a wildcard, you can't take a punt like you did last season with Tony, right? I know it didn't pan out, but the point was that it was supposed to be a risk for a couple of weeks, and then you move on to Solanke, right?
Yeah.
That was, yeah, okay. So I feel like this season you could do that in a more robust manner with someone like Havertz. Because what's the worst case scenario? Odegaard doesn't come back. Havertz continues to play close to number 8 because Jesus keeps getting more minutes as striker. But there will be moments within the game as well where Jesus comes off because he's not going to play 90 minutes anyway. So it's going to be a weighted average of Havertz playing 8 and Havertz playing 9, which is good enough for me, I think. I don't know if you have any strong opinions, but on this one, I think I'm firmly of the opinion that if you're on the wildcard, you need to go for a double attack, just from an EV perspective as well.
Yeah, I think I found that the double attack is super competitive, but it's also kind of like you have to decide if you go for Haaland, for example, whether you actually go for Havertz and Solanke as well on top of that. That does seem like a bit of a stretch. So then either you go Solanke and then you budget down, you go double defense, or you go Havertz and maybe you forego Solanke, which I'm not sure if that feels great. It was sort of one of the issues that I was dealing with when I was like thinking about a prospective wildcard 6 draft. So it's something that I'm definitely still pondering on. And then another thing I'm thinking too is just looking at the actual ownerships within the game. It's not like that many people are actually on double Arsenal defense, right? So like just being ahead of the curve not taking like hits to get towards double Arsenal defense, I think is something I'm very comfortable doing.
Correct.
Even though, like, let's say everyone either owns maybe like one of Gabriel or Raya that I'm competing with right now on the kind of prospective team that I have for Gameweek 5, for example. So yeah, that's something I'm thinking about.
No, I'm not saying that either way is clear.
Yeah,
But
I
just feel like that risk is extremely appetizing, which is very rare because if I'm thinking about a wild card and I want to be as robust as I can, what you said makes complete sense. Most of the field owns a maximum of one defender. So by you going two defenders, you completely skip the headache of transferring Havertz out later down the line if you have to, and then going into the second Arsenal defender.
Yeah.
So maybe you save 2 free transfers there, which makes complete sense if you want to start wildcard 6 with that. But it just feels like it's more exciting with double attack.
No, it's true, and to be fair, I think they're very close decisions, and it probably also depends on whether you feel like you'll be continually, I guess, invested in a certain spot, right? Like,
correct,
holding Havertz isn't actually a bad thing at all, I guess, after that. But then it's what's the opportunity cost, I guess, in terms of defense potentially. This is something I'm probably also thinking about. Do you have any thoughts in terms of?
Can I interrupt? Sorry. One last thing. Merino and Odegaard.
Yeah.
Their respective timelines for actually play a key role. So before you actually wildcard in 6, maybe that's worth looking at because maybe we'll have an update on both their injury situations. Once those two are back, I feel like then maybe there's a chance that Havertz might even get subbed pre-90. Because right now they don't have enough options. He has to play 90 every single game. So the appeal might diminish quite quickly, which is why now that you've said your piece, I've said my piece, I feel like maybe double defense is just much more robust. Sorry, please continue with the question.
No, that's fair. Although I guess that's saying a lot for, let's say, Merino, right? Like that's saying that Merino is basically locked down left center mid, which
no, not really. I just mean one of those two. So between Rice, Odegaard, and Merino, 2 of them will play. So it's just that Jesus has to compete with either on the wing with Martinelli, but there's Trossard as well, and then he has to compete at the center forward role. So that's where I was thinking. Oh, my bad. There's Partey as well. So there's your 3 midfielders. Yeah.
No, I kind of get what you mean. Okay.
Yeah.
That's true. And to be fair, that's also why I'm leaning towards just going Raya, because I think sometimes at times like you will find solves that there's like keeper rotation, and part of that like it's just my like if I want to like ignore like I don't know like Fleck and Muric, for example, or like Ederson Muric, like I don't mind just like holding Raya at times and kind of solving like that. And I think we've discussed that previously. It's like I'd rather solve with like inclusions like that than just like solving for defaults without specific exclusions and inclusions. Like if you are mind is to just go and you're happy with, let's say, one goalkeeper, totally fine to just do that, in my opinion. And if you choose to go Raya, then just solve like that, as opposed to trying to see how much but you can also just run another solve with Havertz and just see like what the EV gain or loss is and sort of make a decision based on that. Especially if you kind of take into account Havertz losing minutes in the future. I guess where do you stand on Man United midfielders, right? Like players like Rashford and Garnacho. I know Ahmad started the season quite well. Like he's had really good showings, I'd say. At times he's been off the bench. At times he started. Garnacho's played really well so far too in the EFL Cup, but probably hasn't really maximized within the Premier League. Whereas Rashford, I guess, just scored a goal in Gameweek 4. Those are the picks I'd say on Gameweek 6, where I'm still uncertain about how good the minutes are for Garnacho and Ahmad specifically, and how those two will have their minutes progress. But where are you at in terms of like Rashford? Because I think I find that he's probably a pick that could maybe show up on, like, especially in place of that Eze spot, as I said, on wildcard 6. So any thoughts on Rashford, for example, and where his minutes are?
It's I think our opinions are pretty similar on Rashford, where he is an extremely streaky player. So it's very difficult to gauge if that hot streak is yet to come, or is this just a flash in the pan where he scores for a couple of weeks and then he's back to being a 70th minute sub or thereabouts. So I've been considering Rashford for some other fantasy games, and my key consideration was also Europa League, right? And Europa League is the same format as Champions League. So again, 8 games, 2 teams from each pot. And the first 2 games are, I forgot the first one. The second game is Porto away, which is the more difficult one anyway. Uh, on the balance of it, for the next couple of game weeks, especially if you're looking at Wildcard 6, he might just be the way for you to keep Holland and also have a United midfielder. Because United fixtures for the next 10, 12 are pretty good, right? If you look at it. Assuming that Rashford starts every single game, which I don't see not happening, by the way, I just think he's going to start most of the games. My key consideration here is Højlund coming back. So the news was that Højlund might be on the bench for Crystal Palace. If that's the case, then it's Højlund and Zirkzee who are going to be competing for centre forward, which locks out that position for Rashford. So he can no longer shift into that position while Ahmad and Garnacho play on the wings.
Yep.
And that is pretty critical for us because I was thinking early in the season, those 3 could have easily played or started together. And if Højlund is going to be back, that's pretty much going to be impossible. So my reading on the Rashford is his minutes might stay 80 and slightly below, but I think he's still a pretty good option at that price. So if you put his minutes at, let's say, a DK of 80, 78, 76, 72, something like that in the next 4 weeks, I think you'll find that he would still pretty much show up if you ban Bruno. Because if you don't ban Bruno Fernandes, I think the only midfielder you're going to get from United is going to be Bruno Fernandes.
Yeah, that makes sense actually. And to be fair, Bruno's always going to give you that guarantee, apart from when he got subbed off like 10 minutes early versus Brighton.
Yeah. And McTominay has moved to Napoli now, so we don't need to worry about that.
That's true. Any thoughts on? I'm trying to think if there's any other edge picks that we haven't really discussed.
We can go through a couple of things that we have noted for minutes xMins corner. So first is Solanke played in the EFL Cup game. So what are your thoughts in general about his mins for Brentford and later on?
Yeah, I think his minutes should still be good, and part of that's because I still think like Richarlison's not really fit, right? So I don't know. I mean, like I wonder if giving him minutes in the EFL Cup is just part of bringing him back to full match fitness, because I think with Ange you can clearly see that there's players who will like always be subbed off early, like Maddison, because he just can't sustain playing football for more than 75 minutes, it seems. Whereas like with Solanke, I think he clearly can, and I think Ange is totally fine with that. And the same applies to Son even. Like Son, I think last season we did see some early substitutions, but that was the Son who was dealing with like a lot of injuries at the time. It seemed like he was just perpetually unfit, but now that he's like fit, you're not seeing that, right? So I feel like his minutes should be really good. Like I wouldn't look any lower than 86, and I think I'd be happy with that, really. I don't know. What are your thoughts on Solanke's minutes?
There's Europa League coming as well for Spurs, similar to United.
Yeah.
So I don't know if worry is the right word, but okay. So you're absolutely right on all counts. By the way, I don't doubt that Solanke started the EFL Cup game to build fitness. That's the first thing that came to my mind. I don't think he's going to be benched against Brentford. It's more about what happens when Europa League starts, because you have back-to-back games in midweek. So
yeah, one of the issues too is they just had 2 big injuries, right? Like Werner and Odobert were both injured in the AFL Cup, I think.
Odobert was as well. I thought I knew about Werner. I didn't know about Odobert.
Yeah, so okay. They're a squad that's stretched pretty thin, and that's not helpful. But yeah, I have to imagine that he's still going to try and maximize results, and Solanke's minutes are probably going to be very good as a result of that.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah,
and that means like Kulusevski playing on wing positions as well, like potentially, right? Is sort of my thought.
Yeah, absolutely, makes sense. Another point was Gakpo/Diaz, because Arne Slot has come out and said that Gakpo was supposed to start against Forest, but Luis Diaz came back from international duty in better condition, which I find implausible. That's to funny. Be honest, because yeah, absolutely. Here I was talking about how Diaz is coming off from South America later than Gakpo, and he's going to be less fit or less ready, I suppose. And the exact opposite transpired. So that's the only thing from that. I don't think that means Diaz is not going to start the next game. I just think that this means we firmly have to divide the minutes up however you want to between Diaz and Gakpo for left wing, and then some minutes between Gakpo and Jota for centre forward, although they should now be minimal because Arne Slot has clearly said that he sees Gakpo as a left winger and not a centre forward.
Yeah, those comments were... I think one of the things that's concerning for him is that it just doesn't seem like he has the forward depth that he wants, because Jota and Nunez are both struggling right now. And then I think that's what sort of prompted some of the Gakpo rumors, because I do think we know that, and we expect that Gakpo will play left wing, but ultimately it's like, he's not really getting what he wants. What is still a continuing sign is that Sobo is playing an absurd amount of minutes. So like when I'm thinking about some of my picks for this week, actually I'm considering definitely having a thought about maybe Sobo as a transfer path if let's say Isak is actually available. But yeah, something I was thinking about was that for Liverpool. The issue is just whenever these players are playing 70 minutes a game, they're just not very strong, particularly when the fixtures are worse. So at the start of the season, I think we can give credit to people who started with Jota and Diaz and actually got like really good minutes at the start. That probably, has necessitated a transfer further down the line, but I think they've won in terms of the points because everyone else has stunk it up, which is really annoying for us. But yeah, fair play. Now, though, it's just, I wouldn't really consider transfers for those players, unfortunately, and that's just simply fixture related. There are players like Gordon, I guess, who, and Bowen, who we do look at traditionally as quite boring, but definitely will be picks that, once again, it's like, if you're okay with a pick like Bruno, there's nothing that says either Bowen or Gordon are not bad picks. So I think they're interesting for sure. Simply because they're just permanent 90 plus minute playing players who can play multiple positions. If Isak's out, for example, even for like a small amount of time, that's just Gordon, I think, being insane. Across the board, though, I think we have maybe Dominic Calvert-Lewin and Vardy left as the interesting sort of forwards to discuss. Where do you think about Dominic Calvert-Lewin's minutes are? I know someone like Ollie, for example, an Everton fan, pretty on the ball. He's pretty confident that DCL's a low 80 minute player, which I think just makes him absurdly optimal. Any thoughts on these sorts of players?
No, I agree with Ollie. He's going to be low 80s, mid 80s for sure.
Yeah.
This is an illness, by the way. I saw some people were asking in chat what happened to DCL. So it's just an illness.
Yeah,
apparently a lot of... Yeah, so Tarkowski, DCL, and Mikalenko are the three players who were ill, which is why they missed out on the EFL Cup game, which they lost to Southampton. So they are going to be back, supposedly, at least in training. I don't know if they'll be fit enough to play on the weekend, but absolutely no doubt in DCL. It's strange. It's called the Mandela effect, right? Because every time I think of DCL, I feel like, oh, he's never played good enough minutes for so long. Like it's just the myth that has been perpetuated everywhere. But Ollie is the one who pointed out to me that actually he's played so many minutes last season that it's not true at all. True. And this is just a continuation of last season, but we can consider last season to be, let's say, a trial run where he actually could sustain the workload of a Premier League season. And so now we know that, he's robust enough. So completely on board with the DCL pick. It's a shame that I won't be able to go for him because I'm not wildcarding in 6. And I'll say my piece on Vardy and then I'll come to you because the name of the pod is Vardy Party. So we have to definitely talk about Vardy. So age is my biggest concern. Edward is right there. I don't think Edward is going to take over from Vardy anytime soon. I just feel like it could be a case where minutes management will come into play and Vardy might get subbed earlier than he has been getting subbed till now. So that's the only concern I have. I don't think Edward is going to start over Vardy anytime soon, but just the fact that you're seeing all these little changes where Mavididi starts all of a sudden and it just feels like he's tinkering around a little bit and Vardy could be subbed as a result. That's all I'll say.
Yeah. And once again, I think that's interesting because if you find Calvert-Lewin to be within that sort of range of minutes, that's also what has like a knock-on impact on picking Solanke, picking Havertz as well. Because I feel like
Correct.
you can probably pick, let's say, Havertz, Solanke plus Palmer, or you can pick Haaland or Calvert-Lewin, right? Because I'm basically looking at João Pedro as a placeholder for our teams for the rest of the season. So that's why if you haven't heard about a third forward, like he's almost nailed in every team possible. As long as he's alive, which it seems like hopefully he is. So that's what I was thinking about actually in terms of like DCL being a huge boost for people who want to wildcard 6 and go for Haaland, keep him on the team. Because yeah, if you have confidence in his minutes, then actually the team looks really, really solid. And then you can actually consider options like Sade, and even Ben Burton Diaz. Maybe if you think that Russell Martin actually has his, head in the right place and hasn't completely tilted, which I think is questionable based on some of the it's just fielding effectively what looks like a different starting 11 every week is not giving me a lot of promise, plus like these 65-minute substitutions where half the team comes off. So yeah, those are my thoughts right now in terms of Southampton, but I think that's good coverage. Let's just quickly jump into captaincy this week before we round out with some chat questions. So it's Salah, and he is the best captain by literally a country mile. And then it's Son and Palmer, and not shown here on YouTube, but definitely Haaland right after Palmer. There aren't too many competing picks, I would say, outside of those four. A lot of people are making these two free transfers because of exactly how good Salah's EV is. And I would say the market odds pretty much back the way these captaincies fall, although probably a little bit higher on Son. Because I think what we mentioned last week on the pod was that, once again, there's a bit of a difference between, I think, reviews sort of implied penalty share versus markets implied penalty share. And I actually tend to agree with, I would say, markets. I think Son is the penalty taker. But I can understand review showing a bit of balance in terms of giving Solanke a bit of strength there. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that? I guess you went Salah early. Unfortunately, didn't reap the rewards last week, but you're good at Salah cap, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And so here's the thing: there were two routes possibly for people who were suffering from Kwanzaa and Nkunku and many other players, where because you didn't bank enough transfers to make a double move, you were always going to be left with the option of going Saka to Son, for example, as a single move, and captain Son instead of Salah. So it makes sense that those are the top two options, because you either have two free transfers, you go to Salah; you don't have two free transfers, you go to Son, which makes sense because if you downgraded in Nkunku, you definitely have cash in the bank, and then you can make that move. Unless some people went Gabriel to Robertson. Even if you did that, I think you still have cash in the bank, because downgrading Nkunku definitely left people with 1.5 to 1 million in the bank.
Yeah.
So Salah it is. I don't think there's much to talk about captaincy.
Yeah, it's
honestly
not controversial. I guess it's funny that Haaland blanked in Champions League, because we would have had a narrative within Twitter where you can't not consider him as a captaincy option all the time. And unfortunately, he's already blanked within one of his games this season, whilst he's played 90 minutes. So I feel like that's unfortunate that we're sort of robbed from that, because if he kind of went nuclear versus Inter Milan, that narrative would have definitely even come about, I think, within analytic circles. But yeah, I mean, I'm not very keen on captaining Haaland. He will be my vice this week, but that's about it.
So for the both of us, I hope you realize that we've had a hat trick, a brace, and 4 goals as our captains in the last 4 sort of fantasy weeks, which is an absurd dopamine hit. And it's when the crash inevitably comes with captaincy blanks, it's going to hit even harder than it usually does, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, cool. Let's jump into some chat questions. Starting from the top, thank you, Luis, so much for watching at 3:35 p.m. from the USA. What's wrong with Calvert-Lewin? He's not. Yeah, I think you've already mentioned on that. I do think Muniz has lost his place temporarily versus Raul Jimenez, so that's a good question.
Yep.
In terms of the Salah price rise, I don't know if it's going to happen. I feel like the predictions for the price fall seem accurate, but it seems like we're getting less price rises in general. Obviously, algorithms to sort of try to chase up to that. But I feel like I'm still seeing a lot of algorithms predicting a lot of price rises every day. But actually, there's much less price rises and much more price falls anyways. So I don't know if you kind of agree with me. I think maybe Salah won't rise today.
Fully agree with you.
EJ says,
I just think that, sorry, one thing on price predictions or price change predictions is that these algorithms, just like expected value, need time to catch up to changes that have been made to the back end of FPL. I think that there have been changes made. Maybe the thresholds have been increased for price rises because they don't want people to start banking a lot of money in the beginning, and then you have a lot of inequality amongst teams, where a lot of teams have 1 to 2 million more than other teams at the halfway point in the season. So more people are likely to quit, right? Because you see that you don't even have the budget to be able to afford these players that you want to see play. So maybe from that perspective, it makes sense. Again, as you said, it's guesswork at the end of the day. So take it with a pinch of salt.
Yeah, that's fair. EJ says, have you considered that Gameweek 6 wildcard may not be worth it, considering you own a significant amount of players that are already... I don't really agree with that, because I think a lot of players on my team are not on my wildcard 6. I mean, actually, you are kind of right. I do think my defense is... If you look at my team, for example, I think Henderson needs to go. I don't have Gabriel. I don't have Pinnock and Bumo. I don't have someone who replaces Rodgers in that spot. I would lose the value in the short term of not having a good captaincy in Gameweek 5, and I don't have Calvert-Lewin, for example. So yeah, I think that's more than enough transfers to justify wildcard, in my opinion. But other questions. Thank you, Tom. And Tom, actually, legendary manager, by the way, so thank you for watching the pod.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another tick box there. No, I'm kidding. Lewis as well, thank you. Have to say I agree. Wildcard 6 feels rather condemning with Isak and now Muniz injury. And part of this is true as well. Like, I think a lot of people have suffered from a lot of their assets deteriorating in the short term. Wildcard 6 feels like one of the first windows where you can say you've got enough information. You're going to get more information from the next set of midweek fixtures. You'll have watched Arsenal versus Man City. You'd have overcome the good run of Liverpool games. And now you can sort of make decisions about a lot of teams that I think we have a bit more confidence in going forwards. And we've had some seismic shifts in terms of significant injuries, like potentially KDB, Odegaard, etc. Geronimo, I think we answered that in terms of price rises. Dream Brothers says, I don't think Haaland's sell is worth the debilitating squad value. Causes agree with that. Charlie's saying he's wildcarding this week. Would you prefer Eze, Mbumo, or Bowen? I would go Mbumo. I think that he's just generally the best pick out of the three of them, and that's pretty much it. He just has so much more value than Eze now that he's just absolutely nailed on penalties. Eze has what feels like a bit of fake expected value attached to him, and that's
I was going to say, I think we are extremely lucky that Eze still has 47% pen share because he should have close to 0%, and that would mean that his EV is going to go down to a mediocre level.
I think that's just a classic situation where you can't adjust that in terms of modeling, right? Because you can't have like his pen share decaying upwards, like in a slope, if that makes sense. You kind of have to just
slightly. Yeah, very slightly you can, because ultimately he does have better minutes than Mateta.
Absolutely, exactly. He will play the 95 minutes.
Minimal.
Yeah,
exactly. But it's so minimal, right? Because okay, so we skipped this topic, but just to recap what we spoke before we started the pod, with Mateta, I don't see how he's missing out on majority of the minutes, given that he starts in every single EFL Cup game and Premier League game, and they are taking both tournaments seriously. Obviously Premier League, but also EFL Cup this season. So it just seems like if you want, with Mateta, have you considered him, by the way? Or, if you haven't spoken about him?
Not really. No, not if I keep Haaland in my wildcard 6. But he's definitely in and around there, and I think he's competitive against the likes of Solanke. But Solanke also someone we have what we think is dubious pen share.
Exactly.
And I think, to be fair, you make a good point, because when you look at these players and you're honestly just choosing between them, I think it's better to choose the players you're actually comfortable with. Like, if you believe someone has the pen share, you believe his EV is real, then go for those players. Like, and I think this applies to someone like Wood, for example. But when you go for some players where a lot of their, like, they just about creep into your team or creep into yourselves because of like a 30-40% pen share that you might think actually could really be zero the next time a penalty is taken, then, you know, what are you doing in that case, I guess, is what I would say. Like, are you playing for MD or are you playing for points is probably my question. Correct. But yeah. Yep. BBD hat trick, we will be there. All right. That's your brother there, Dream Brother.
Wishful thinking, but yeah, fair enough.
Dream Brother actually had a question though. So he was saying one free transfer. He owns Isak and Muniz, can bench one comfortably for Ben Barrett and Diaz. I think that's fine. Look, Ben is a great play this week. Does he hop off Isak or Muniz? I tend to just think hopping off of Muniz is better unless Eddie actually gives you concrete news, because it still seems like that there's a likelihood that Isak starts, whereas Muniz, there's basically, I think, like a 5% chance he starts. It's not even like
0 chance, I think.
Yeah, like, okay, I'm just being kind.
No, I know you are being kind. I'm just stating it as an owner. I know for a fact he's a dead asset now.
And part of it too is like, okay, unless you want to go Solanke from Isak, I think the most reasonable move is actually someone like Dominic Calvert-Lewin this week. And if you can get there from Muniz, then just make that move. But obviously, if you need to downgrade from Isak instead, then that's a different sort of part of the equation. Luis says he uses wildcard giving to, and he's probably like unhappy with his structure. I feel like if you have players like Jota and Muniz and their minutes could be poor, I think Rodgers is actually still a very good pick, so I wouldn't really be worried about Rodgers. Jota still seems like he could start this week, so I wouldn't be too worried about that. I think Muniz is the pick where I would say start reorganizing your team. Muniz for Dominic Calvert-Lewin seems like the simplest move for most people, so I would just make that move. I wouldn't really take a hit to get rid of a lot of these players. Like, I would address your transfer concerns in terms of the minutes issues in your team, because at least with Jota and at least with Rodgers, there are players around those price points, and hopefully you can start saving some free transfers to get them out of your team when the time comes around. And it might just be downgrading Jota the week after this, and then managing the team after that. Charlie asking a question about who the best 4.5 million defender is. That isn't Rico Lewis, I suppose. Tough question. I think it's probably, I mean, if we started from game week 5, that makes things different. But I think if we start from game week 6, I think actually could be Pinnock, maybe. But generally,
on 5, what are you going to say, Konza or Pau Torres?
True. Yeah. And then I think Dunk actually applies for both. So maybe Dunk is the one.
I would say Van Hecker, just because I have that 1% fear in my mind that this could get benched sometime.
Got you.
But Webster again put in a bad performance against Wolves. So like I said, I can just depend on Webster. He's 100% reliable when it comes to wanting a bad performance. So I just think that Dunk is pretty secure, but I think Van Hecker is even more secure. That's what I would say.
That makes sense. But you do lose a lot of EV because a lot of Dunk a lot of Dunk is attacking EV. So I think because you've missed Ipswich at home, I'd shift actually back to what you were saying in terms of the 2 Aston Villa players, like Konsa or Pau. Harold, thank you. That's really kind. Same with you, Luis, as well. Good shout. Like and subscribe. Anyone here? Is it Vardy and Salah? That's for me, I think, probably my moves. Calvert-Lewin's back in training. That's true, yeah. As I said, I think Calvert-Lewin's actually the better pick over Vardy long term. And I think your take on age is probably the right one. I think I don't know. I'm not looked into like sports science studies, but surely age is just proportional to injuries, right? I don't know. Yeah, so
has to be. I mean, unless you're Ronaldo or Messi.
That's true.
But even they started getting so many niggles, right? Even Messi has hardly played.
And their minutes were managed when they were involved in European competition. Yep. I think now Ronaldo and Messi don't play in leagues where they have to be managed like that, but it's quite different. Yep. McNeil's actually an interesting pick, actually, as well, to be fair. But I think he is like basically Morgan Gibbs. Okay, no, I'm not gonna. That's insulting to Morgan Gibbs White. He's basically Andreas right, who plays slightly more minutes, and
actually has some goal threat, because I think
True.
Andreas' goal threat
Yeah.
has, I don't know where it has
Diminished, basically.
evaporated.
Yeah.
It's absolutely zero right now.
Although Andreas is probably slightly better as a creative open play threat. But yeah, like that's the level of player we're talking about. Obviously, Dwight McNeil has a hole in him from time to time, but yeah, you're looking at, this is like, he's a pick that I would resort to, you know, if all things fail. Like if I don't want to go Ben Brereton Diaz because I think he's fake, or if I don't want to go Sade because I think his minutes are suspect. And kind of going back to what Dream Brother was saying too, I think like it's hard to foresee that Sade doesn't have good minutes because they just don't have enough bodies. Going question. Similar to, sorry, did someone say McNeil is similar to Palmer? All right, that's we're skipping through this discussion. I think that's about it. What do you think about Kudus actually? Because his minutes are actually really high nowadays. I'm seeing. Any thoughts on him?
No, I would go for Bowen actually, just because we've spoken about this last week or the week before, that Somerville is just annoying because we know that he's not going to start over Kudus. That's quite obvious.
Yeah.
It's just that if ever they need to rest Kudus, it seems like a good option. Whereas I feel like Bowen is just going to play 90 every single game, just like Bruno. So it's very hard for me to see past Bowen for a West Ham attacker. Also, given that their strikers just don't seem to be working out, so the onus keeps falling back on Bowen all the time. So this makes sense.
That's fair. Can I ask one more question though? So do you think, what was my question? What were we talking about?
Kudus.
Oh right, yeah. I've looked at his underlying stats and they're actually horrendous. So
I know.
I don't know.
And see, that's my worry with Minte, right? Because even though his start has been good, Kudus is an example of what happens when you come from Eredivisie. And okay, forget about just Kudus.
Yeah.
We've had Donny van de Beek, we've had Anthony. There have been so many players coming in from Eredivisie
with great numbers.
Excellent underlying numbers.
Yeah.
And okay, with Van de Beek, maybe I'm being a little harsh because he was never given the chance. He wasn't. He plays the same position as Bruno. He's never playing in the team. So maybe Van de Beek is a bad example or not a fair example, but Anthony is definitely a fair example of a player who's been given a lot of minutes or a fair few minutes. And I don't know, it just seems like maybe we need to start looking at nerfing or having a factor which diminishes their converted underlying.
And I think the issue too is when you play for such a dominant team in the Eredivisie as well, right? Not just coming from, I don't know, like FC Groningen or something. Like so. Yeah. Maybe we'll have to. Anyways, I feel like Minte owners have taxed themselves, right? So that they can already see the proof in the pudding. No, I'm kidding, but all right.
So actually, you know what? One last thing based on that, someone mentioned Semenyo in the chat, and Semenyo is an interesting one, right? Because he plays Liverpool this week, but his next two fixtures are extremely good.
Amazing.
I think it's Southampton and Leicester, or is it someone else?
It's definitely two. I think you might be right, but
yeah, I think it's the other way. So Arsenal have Leicester, Southampton, maybe.
No, it's definitely Southampton, Leicester. Yeah, in that order for Semenyo, of course.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So for Semenyo, would you even consider him as a 2-week option because his EV is going to be really good, right?
Yeah. Interesting because I know he started the season like molten hot.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you even reason with that? That sort of EV.
That's what I'm thinking. And this is without penalties. Now that we know for sure that he's not in contention to take a penalty, even though I saw him arguing with Kluivert.
Okay,
I don't know what they were arguing about.
Right. I
don't know what they are arguing. He could just be telling Kluivert, give the ball to Evanilson.
Oh, okay. True. Because he is sort of like the team, so to speak.
Yes, he is. Yeah. He is. He is Bournemouth, if you want to, because Solanke has left the club.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
To be
Yeah.
fair,
So
like when I'm thinking about wildcard 6, like he could just be the person that I go for simply. Because
why not? I just feel like it's a good one.
Because it's like why should I go for Ben Brereton Diaz? Why should I go for Sade?
Oh, you should not go for Ben Brereton Diaz.
Yeah.
You
So
should.
I feel like I'll probably lean into a situation where I probably go Semenyo actually. Is the world that I'm gonna be living in soon. And yeah. I think Semenyo is incredible. I think we like Semenyo a lot, and like I don't know,
such a
it's
shame
weird
that
because
I don't
he's
have a
playing the
point for
same
him, by the
role
way.
as last season,
Oh.
but his underlying numbers have started to fly. But then you also wonder like whether he's just growing as a player and things like that. I don't really know how to I
No, and
guess
also
think about the
you see that
situation.
90 minutes, right? The effect of a player guaranteed 90 minutes
Right.
is a lot. And it works both ways. It works to hide some players' mediocre XGXA because they keep getting subbed around 70, so their per 90 stats are boosted.
Very true.
And for some players like Semenyo, maybe you need those 90 minutes in order for you to get that XG. Because if you keep getting subbed around 65, 70, I don't know, as a player, maybe when you start seeing the clock and it's like 65, 70, you know it's your time to be subbed.
Yeah.
Like I'm sure it comes to their mind, right? And this is only from a Min's perspective. I'm not talking about
No, I get that.
their motivation because I that's complete bunk for me. But from a Min's perspective, I just feel like maybe it's just you need 90 minutes to gather that XG or XA.
I guess even from an EV perspective, there's like that threshold between like 90 and 95 that actually gives you a lot of like, EV as well that people don't really think about when they're actually maybe inputting their own numbers. So someone being absolutely nailed, like because there's just a natural sort of expectation of injuries and things like that. I think people might have too high an estimation of players who play between like 65 to 85 minutes a game versus those who play 95. So if like someone like Bruno is like at best 91, then yeah, you kind of have to apply a little bit of that tax to whatever your average is of a player who plays less minutes, like for example Ben Brereton Diaz, and who else was the player that we mentioned? Maybe like Sade, for example. I guess in a world where he's not playing 90s, but you'll have more information this week versus Tottenham. I feel like if Sade, for example, plays 90 there, then it's hard to believe that he's going to be subbed off, right? Like too often they just don't really have anyone else in his position.
I agree. Unless they change formations mid-game, I don't see how he's going to be subbed. They don't have anyone else.
Yeah. So I feel like by doing this, I've reminded myself how good Semenyo is, and he'll be in my wildcard 6. And thank you guys so much for inputting that in the pod.
Yeah. Maybe one last question. I saw one question which was a little interesting. Okay, so Hai saying that Saka, Saka and Isaac out for Salah Vardy. I read something different. This is like a very standard move, right? You're all for this move.
Yeah, that's basically my move.
Yeah.
A question. I mean, would you go Dominic Calvert-Lewin or Vardy this week if it was just one game week and it was a punt?
Ooh.
So it's basically the home game or the away
What's
game.
the EV? What's the EV?
Let's say. I mean, okay. Are we saying that both of these players are playing 80 minutes?
Yeah, let's do that just to be fair to Vardy because I don't think the minutes reduction is going to come right away.
Then yeah, I think actually the EV gap is probably something like 0.5 in Vardy's favor if they both play 81.
I think that pretty much makes it the clear choice. Assuming you're wildcarding in 6, if you're not, then maybe DCL is the better option if you want him for a couple of more weeks.
True.
Yeah. I know you're not a fan of 0.5 and neither am I. Like minute differential EV. I just feel like in this case it's literally a straight shootout between two players for 1 week. So it looks like EV is a good enough metric to break the deadlock.
That's true, yeah. And I probably need to look into it in terms of like market odds as well. But I imagine that the difference is quite similar. So Vardy's definitely super interesting this week. I do wish there was a world where Watkins was like out and I could just get a Duran start. That would be lovely, but it's not going to happen. So that's that.
Yeah. Tom saying that he's probably going Vardy, but he feels dirty, which is... I just think for someone like him who's played for a long time and has experienced all the highs of Vardy as well, it's a nostalgic moment because like Fran was mentioning to me that he didn't actually experience when it was prime Vardy, and he was scoring braces against Liverpool and winning the Premier League. So
that's exactly it. I don't have the experience of, like, I guess, good memories of Vardy, so this will be my first Vardy party, I guess. Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
I think that's all. We've had a great discussion today. I think the chat has been outstanding. So thank you everyone for joining today. Make sure to like and subscribe and let us know, how we're doing and if we can do any better. I think we're always trying to improve, Fran and I. So do let us know if you have any feedback. Good luck for Gameweek 5. And if you're wildcarding, good luck to those people who are wildcarding as well. See you next week. Bye.
Absolutely.